I don't care whether the liability is the state's or whether the liability is the employer's. If there's a liability, I want that liability to go away. And I wouldn't be able to understand if there was not enough money to pay me because, well, we had eliminated one liability, but we hadn't eliminated the other liability, and we can't do anything to eliminate the other liability because of the details of this complex funding plan. So I know that, and so what we have is we have a situation, and this to me seems to be, a risk. We have a situation where we can be very underfunded. We can have a situation where the rates go up for either the state or the employers, and at the same time they go down for the other party. That makes no sense. And that's not a good situation if we're trying to move towards full funding. We know that we're not moving the needle very much for a while. We know that we're at risk if there's a big drop in the markets of having then a real decline in our funded status, and yet we have this funding plan that allows one party's contributions to go down. I think we should say that, because I don't think we should be focusing on one side or the other. And so what I think, I think that I think that should be part of it. I think that, and I also wonder, and this again gets back to the point, and I'll ask maybe fiduciary counsel or Brian. I mean, the issue is not, we don't care who has to pay, right? We just care that the liability goes away. So is it our fiduciary responsibility, or do we have the authority as fiduciaries to point out that for school districts, these contributions are putting strains on their budgets? Similarly, do we have the right or the authority or the obligation to say that health spending or social service spending at the state might be constrained because of these contributions? I think as fiduciaries, that's not our issue. As fiduciaries, our issue is we need to say that the liability has to be addressed. And so I would take issue with bringing that into this report. I don't think that's our issue. So those are my two thoughts. Otherwise, love the plan, love everything you guys do.
So David, in talking to Paul's point about the operational, how the plan operates and the dichotomy between the state and the districts and how they work against each other counterintuitively. We're definitely going to need to, we'll definitely put that in how the plan operates, but what I hear Paul saying is we also need to have some verbiage on that under the risks as well.
Okay, yeah, our plan was to,
Yeah.
our plan was to highlight that, as I said earlier, like we may be in a situation where at the time when we need more contributions, we're asking one of the party to contribute less.
Right, and I think that is a risk.
So we will make sure that it's highlighted in the report.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think where the boundary gets trickier is when you're passing judgment that the plan would then therefore be altered in a certain way. And you're saying, you're just alerting them to the risks around
I
this
don't think
piece.
we're not making any recommendations.
I know, that's what I'm saying. I just wanted to.
I mean, I didn't think
Right.
there's nothing in the report that would be recommendations, right?
Right.
So if, and I've also often heard that we should resist as a body telling the legislature how to fix things,
Yeah,
right? So but that means we should sort of put out there all of the issues so that they know what they might want to address.
Yeah. I just want to
But we're not
highlight
making
the
any
boundary there
recommendations.
where
Yeah.
this is. yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
good, thanks.
yeah. All righty. Any other discussion? Is there anything else, Nora?
So I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this appropriately, because the CalSTRS board does have a school board representative on the board for a reason. And my take on the role is that that reason is to share some of the concerns that school boards have across the state to be able to meet the need, right? So I think it is my responsibility, my fiduciary responsibility to say, what I'm hearing from school boards across the state is that this is a challenge. I'm not saying that they didn't accept it, it's part of the deal, right? But I think there is a risk to us when, what happens when school boards decide not to pay, right? The school that, it happened in Oakland with one of the charter schools, right? We've gone through this process. So what does that mean? What does that mean in our, cities that don't pay into the fund? So there is something there. I don't know exactly, I'm not saying that it has to be part of this report, but I think there is a space for us as fiduciaries to have these discussions because there is an impact if they don't pay into the fund.
We can,
So,
I don't know. Go
yeah,
ahead.
we're gonna need some clear direction on how to go on that from you guys, from the board.
So
So-
let me try to take a hit at it. Nora, I think you bring up a valid point. I don't know if it necessarily is something to include in the report, but I
Yeah.
think that's something that we could explore further. So let me try to do something and see if that works with you. So Jack and Julie, you're here, aren't you? So Jack, Julie and I have had several conversations about contributions in particular districts. And one of the things that I have found out in having those conversations with her is there are times that even with the increase for the contributions to us taking place, some districts are actually paying less in contributions one year than they did the year prior. Because it has to do with movement on salary schedules, it has to do with negotiated collective agreements, collective bargaining agreements. So maybe we need, because this is out there, maybe we need to have some sort of educational piece on what's really happening in the districts and not necessarily have anecdotal, the things that we're hearing in the press, like Harry was talking about, that how it actually is affecting districts. Anecdotally, I know that there's been superintendents that have wrapped that contribution over their whole budget, not just the salary portion for the certificated portion. So maybe we can have an educational piece. Let me ask the board, is that something that you would find educational? Would you like to do that? Julie, I just set you up for a whole lot of work, I think. But,
So you're saying more data-driven than
yeah,
just
more
anecdotal.
data-driven, just
So
anecdotal.
not just stories we hear,
Right.
but one example.
We can actually see what's happening. Okay, so we're gonna have to try to find a place on our work plan for that. Okay, Nora, does that help? Okay, super.
Help him right now,
So,
though.
rather in the report, so we will not include that in the report.
Right. So I think we have the four that
Yep.
you were asking about, and then adding in, the only thing I've heard to add into that is taking a look at the dichotomy between the district and the districts in the state, and making that a statement somehow into the risk part of it.
Yeah, we will make sure. And then we're going to also try to address some of Nora's suggestion around other things that we've done as
Right,
an
right, right.
organization
Yep,
to
yep.
become more
The
sustainable
infrastructural
long-term. So
sustainability,
we will have,
RMS.
yeah, we have, I think I'm 100% clear on the directions. We are good to go. Thank
That
you.
sounds good.
Appreciate it.
Right. All righty, thank you.
Right.
All right, we are at 12:30, past 12:30. Oh, we're a little over an hour behind, guys. We're scheduled to take lunch for an hour. The cafeteria here closes at 1. So I want to make sure that the people in the audience are able to shoot there. So we're going to break now for lunch. I'd like to do a half an hour, and we'll try to regain some time. All righty. You ready? Thank you. So the next thing we're going to tackle is our strategic plan for 19 through 22. Let's do it. Woohoo!
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. This is an information item, and it's the first reading of the strategic plan today. And I'm here with Jan Spano, of course, from the Enterprise Strategy Management team. And the purpose, of course, is to walk you through what we've collected based on this long journey that we've been on since, I believe, last year. At this time is when we started. But to set some context for what the strategic plan is for the new board members who are participating today, I thought I'd maybe just provide a quick 30-second overview, because yesterday in investment committee, you heard about the concept of alignment tools, governance alignment tools. And Scott Chan, I thank you for bringing up that word or those phrases and using that phrase, because the strategic plan is a governance alignment tool for the entire enterprise. And that stems from the board all the way through to staff across all of its functions. It's really that forward 3-year look on what is CalSTRS looking to work on in the next 3 years and why, and what does the definition of success look like relative to those. The current strategic plan that is, of course, guiding current efforts expires or concludes at the end of this fiscal year. And so that's why we've embarked on this process early enough to provide sufficient and ample time for all of the discussion and deliberations that lead us to this point today. Of course, the strategic plan links to the board's work plan, which was mentioned this morning. And that's something that the board talks about in July, where you look at not only the board, but the committee level. What are the topics that the committee is going to address over the coming fiscal year, and assigning those out to your individual agendas. So the strategic plan helps to drive that board work plan. The strategic plan also drives staff's 1-year business plan here. And then in terms of accountability, the strategic plan, the board uses that in a way to ensure accountability with the CEO's performance evaluation. And so that's part of the highest level governance structure and why this document is so essential. Given the backdrop of history, of course, we mentioned yesterday morning in the board governance committee the new trustee orientation and how that was an initiative that stemmed out of the 2003 strategic plan around that time. And suffice it to say, CalSTRS has a very long-standing history of engaging in strategic planning and doing it in a very collaborative way. I mentioned the word collaboration because obviously I'm sitting here as a consultant that works for the board and I work with staff. And Jan, of course, I partner with her so that she and her team can provide the internal guidance and structure that's needed to actually pull this process off, because it is a large one. It takes many hours. It takes a lot of effort. And so while we are sitting here at the table today, this is your plan. This is staff's plan. And we are certainly the people that are organizing the ability for the board to give us your direction. But it reflects collective voices, not only of the board itself and executive staff and the directors, but really everyone in this building and even the member service centers. So again, just the breadth of what this process reflects. So it has been a long journey. I thought what might be a good idea is if Jan did a quick overview of all the steps that we've been through and pulled out some highlights that we tried to incorporate with this draft of the strategic plan, and then perhaps we can loop back and open it up for comment.
Okay, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. While we're introducing the first draft here, it's by no means the first time that most of you as board members have been engaged in the process. As Amy mentioned, this process started quite honestly, a year ago. It was February that Cassandra Licknock sent out an email as a survey to all of our staff members asking, in regards to planning and getting ready to go on the new strategic plan, what do you see as CalSTR's most strategic areas of focus in the coming years? And we had hundreds of responses from that. We believe it's so important to begin with the unique perspective that our employees have throughout the organization. They have special vantage points. So it's been really a 5-step process. That was the first step that we took. The second step was facilitated conversations around the information that we received from employees. We did facilitated conversations with our senior leaders. The third step, and I want to say a bit simultaneously, is Ms. McDuffie and her staff was interviewing you, members of the board, as well as the executive team, with those 2 questions. If CalSTRS was incredibly successful, it's the year 2028, what's that picture of CalSTRS success? And then the second piece was to capture the critical issues the organization might face from your perspective in the coming years. Our fourth step in the process took place in June. The executive team took the compiled information, went off-site, talked about what are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. What is that picture of success? What is that beginning to look like? What are the barriers? What are our drivers of success? And what should we be focused on as a path forward? And then finally, that fifth step is when we met with you in October at the board offsite. And as you'll recall, as a precursor to that, you received this SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, to be looking at and get your juices flowing. And when you arrived, you received this wonderful placemat to look at that was really the compilation of all of the work that we had done, what we'd collected, and to help focus your attention to some of these things. At that offsite, we discussed again that vision of success, 2028. We agreed upon objectives that we would like to have stay and carry forward to the new strategic plan, as well as we talked about a couple that might need to be modified and also carry forward. We looked at all of the documents that I've mentioned to identify what are the critical issues facing CalSTRS as an organization that we needed to address in a new strategic plan. And then, most importantly, we prioritize those critical themes and try to highlight what are those catalysts for changes. That's where we left off in October. This next strategic plan, as Amy has so wonderfully outlined, will guide our actions. It will inform our decision-making, and it will help us prioritize resources over the next 3 years. And specifically, that will happen here with staff within the building, and it will also happen with you. So the strategic plan, that strategy in essence would help determine your board work plan and your committee plans. There should be a direct correlation between those two. This is your first view of that compiled effort. I have 3 pieces I just want to point out to you. Number 1 is the measures and targets that are designed. They're designed to be more quantifiable than you may have seen. For those of you who've been with us for a while in the past, you'll see number, dollar signs, percentages. We're hoping to paint a picture for you so you get a sense of how far along we are in achieving the objectives. The second thing is really important. The second aspect is some measures are designed or they specify something to maintain current levels. And I want to say that regarding a few of our targets, maintaining current levels is truly an appropriate achievement for the organization. I want to remind you of one of our critical themes that we talked about at the offsite, which was prioritization, effectiveness, harnessing energy, controlling pace and focus, board, staff, consultants. And what we heard in those comments from our employees, a just an overwhelming voice was, please prioritize, make decisions, watch the work balance, as we have, it was set in context of the Pension Solution Project and that impact to business areas. And as an organization and thinking about capacity, we definitely look at and thinking about what's the additional effort to raise the bar, to raise a number, to raise a result, and then analyze what's the trade-off. What are we willing to give this for that in order to achieve something higher? So I just wanted to point that out about some of the targets. The third thing, third aspect is on TRB 61, a new component that we've included is that vision of success. So you'll see that outlined, that 10-year view of as successful CalSTRS. Our next steps at this point, we'd like to hear your thoughts and incorporate any feedback that you might have. Our plans to return in March and hopefully bring this forward for possible adoption. We will, at that point, begin working on a business plan, and we'll continue to examine what those resources are, time, budget, personnel, to determine how we can design and launch the initiatives that would support the objectives going forward over the next 3 years. And with that, unless Amy, you have anything else, I'm ready to turn it back.
Sure, I was just going to add before, Madam Chair, we asked for comments that really this is a very wide-reaching plan. So as you think about all the major initiatives going on here at CalSTRS, Pension Solutions being one of those, you'll hear about that this afternoon. This notion of having workload-adjusted measures. When you have a project that takes 300 staff, for example, or more, to make sure that the staff that are focused on those major efforts feel supported by the board and the rest of the organization so that it's abundantly clear that those are important and they're going to get the resources that they need. So I appreciate you mentioning the measures there and calibrating those. And then I would also say, well, we're happy to take comments. Executive staff is also prepared to address their specific areas as well. So Madam Chair, any questions would be valued and appreciated by us.
Well, I don't have anybody in the queue yet, but so I'll kick it off, I guess. I'll start with TRB 66. And this would be goal 3, member employer. So on this page, there's a couple of measurements and targets. So the measurement is a percentage, and then the target would be 50% or 100%. But if the measurement's a percentage that's unknown, how do we measure that? So I guess, so let me give you an example. So we say, a percentage of project deliverables accepted within the established time frame. This is under digital transformation. So we know what those project deliverables are, and we know what our time frame is. So the percentage that's met, we want 100% of those met. We want 100% of those. That's our goal, right? And that's what our target is. So that's understandable to me. But when you go to 66, when you say percent of annual stakeholder communication and outreach plan activities, do we know what that number is?
So on this one, we're specifically looking at an annual stakeholder communication plan. So if this strategic plan is adopted, that communication plan will be drafted. And so then we'll know for that year, when we get to the end of it, did we hit it? And we'll be preparing one, because this one specifically says an annual plan. We'll be preparing that year by year.
Then how on the, so then we would also know how many people we invite to the employer roadshow? And if we want 50% of them to attend, so we know how many we invited.
And I think that this is more than just how many we invite and how many we attend and how many would attend, and I'm happy if someone else would like to speak to this. But I believe this would be identified. So with each one of these measures and target, we actually put together a sheet and a definition, so staff works with each of the executive sponsors to really further define what this looks like. And in some cases, it may even be listing out, these are all the employers we have identified, and we may be just checking them off. I don't know if we'll go quite that detailed, but we will have a very defined way of calculating.
The measure?
Yes.
Okay, super, thanks. Nora?
Clarification or question. Under organizational strength, it may be in here, but not specifically called out, succession planning within the organization. And not sure if that's just a separate plan as part of organizational strength, or should it be incorporated into our overall strategic plan? Because of the importance of maintaining consistency and what that looks like for the efficiency of an organization.
I thought we had at some point in it. We'll be happy to add that back at the pleasure of the board.
Just to comment on why it probably isn't in here on the strategic plan levels, because we've had it at various increments in the strategic plans over the last few years, and particularly in the organization, it's been operationalized to where it's not a strategic goal, because we have a plan that in developing our leadership and transition plans, and there's a lot of activities that become operationalized that it still occurs. It's just that it's not reaching an end goal because we're doing it continuously.
Okay. If it doesn't have to be there, I'm fine with that. I just wanted to make sure we shared that it's now part of the operations, and so we don't have to include it in here unless somebody else.
There was some other strategic activity or goal that you would want us to keep at the higher level that you want to have visibility. We can always come back and discuss it as well.
Yeah, and the one comment that I would add is that at the board's level of responsibility in terms of succession planning for the CEO and CIO positions, that's something that we've been actively working on in a building block type of approach to adopt as a routine governance practice. And so we're right in the midst of that, and going to be bringing in things in March as a board to try to continue to move it along. So I agree, Cassandra, I think we should talk about, with what's left, does it make sense to include this? Because things in this plan will kick off on July 1. We may be concluded with that at that time, but we'll reevaluate it. I appreciate the comment.
Lynn?
Thank you. I want to thank you for the plan, and I liked all of the measures. I think that will make it easier to judge whether or not the plan has been successful. So I had two questions for you, and the first is on the Goal 1, Objective D, where it says establish a public comment framework by December 2020. So will that include stakeholder input into the plan?
I don't want to speak out of turn on that one.
I'm sorry, Goal 1,
Goal 1, Objective D, number 3, establish a public comment framework.
Yes,
Yes.
we're working with Grant, and we're taking a look at some of the opportunities and perhaps working with some examples around the state and other public agencies of perhaps even working with our stakeholders on producing a bare bones regulation or other frameworks for public comment so that we can maybe better utilize our time, board meeting time. There have been at least some sentiments that some of our commentary is not necessarily pertain to some of the things on our agenda. So we're looking at opportunities, we're exploring with the chair, vice chair, interest groups, and Grant's going to be leading our efforts in that area.
Okay. All right. And then, and which committee would that go through, the regular board meeting then?
Well, it would, because if anything, it would, if it would be a regulation, certainly it would be, but that's where the conversation would be in the regular board meeting.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I had was on Goal 2, Objective C. It says percentage of identified critical business processes addressed in the disaster recovery program. The target's 100%. Do you know how close we are to that 100% target now?
I'm looking at Ashish.
Okay. Ashish and or Lisa. yeah.
So currently we have the critical application, we back it up, but we did the audit last year, we found some opportunity. So we are going out, a RFP is already in the street to move our few critical application from here, fourth floor, into going to the cloud, kind of. So we are mapping our wherever like business direct application. We have our pension solution is already, we built in that one in DR, but we have many application, which is not a single point of failure, but is still if something happen, flood happen, earthquake happen, or something happen, how our staff will work.
Okay.
So we identified that one is our business plan in the past, and we work on that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And I might add that target of 100% is 100% over 3 years.
Over 3 years. All right, thank you.
Joy?
Thank you, Dana. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all that, all the work that's been done to put the plan together, including the interviews with the board members and a lot of the discussion that you facilitated. I just had a couple questions. So I noticed that there are some objectives that have pretty specific targets or timeframes associated with them, and others that don't. And then there also, looks like there may be some objectives that are things that I think we already have in place. So one example is TRB 64, Objective C, under leverage investment cost information. One of the measures and targets is produce the comprehensive investment cost report and optimize trend analysis data with the target being annually. I think is that sort of stating what we're already doing, or is that an expansion on what we've been doing the last couple of years?
Thank you for the question. Deborah Smith, Chief Operating Investment Officer. So yes, we are continuing to do the investment cost report, and the focus on this objective is to optimize that trend analysis. Since we only have the 3 years, we want to optimize that trend analysis to move it out to, a longer term, and then use that data as staff for, when we look at the collaborative model and moving forward with that implementation.
Okay. So maybe that's an example, and there were some other examples separate from the one I was talking about, Deborah, but where we have really specific targets associated with the goals. And they're targets that I'm just not familiar with, and so I'm just pulling one randomly. As an example, on TRB 66, the number of, under Objective D, the number of members age 44 and younger who participate in a new Educator Day event, our target is 500. I have no idea if that's a good number, a stretch number. We did 450 last year, and we just need 50 more. So I'm not asking for the information now necessarily, but I think you were ready though. I feel like you should give it to me just because you were ready.
They're so responsive.
But I think what I would find helpful, maybe as we implement the plan, and either report back on progress or report in a year on how we achieved objectives, is either knowing what the baseline was, both for something that's a little bit more subjective, like what Deborah just described, that we've initiated the cost report and made some great progress, but now that's the baseline, and now we're looking to expand and do more. Or if it's something that's a quantitative target that we're trying to meet, what's the baseline upon which we set that target, and did we exceed it? I think the other concept that in the future would be helpful is even thinking about, whether our targets are targets to sort of, meet to be successful, and then, are there stretch targets beyond that? Like, wow, we really, blew it out of the water. And maybe you don't have to necessarily establish 2 metrics, but just knowing a baseline helps I'm a lot more impressed if you get to 500 if I found out that you only had 100 last year versus if you had 490 last year.
That's great feedback, and we'll take it. I think from our perspective, maybe we could go back through the measures and make sure that we can isolate where that occurs throughout the document, and where it does, we'll, based on the direction, treat it differently or somehow address that within the plan itself.
Yeah, either within the plan or again, on future reports back on progress, or when you report on the overall success at the end of the 1920 fiscal year, I guess, it's, looking at, how we did compared to whatever the baseline is we're establishing.
And I think I mentioned those sheets that we do with each of the executive sponsors. It's one of the pieces that we could capture on those sheets is where do we stand today? So that at least we have that historical documentation that we could respond to.
Thank you.
Karen?
Along those same lines, it was confusing to me, and the objective that Joy just brought out kind of reminded me of just certain things. If we're already doing it, so it's just a matter of words, if we're continuing that effort, or because a lot of these things, a lot of these objectives, it seems like we've never done it before. And so we're going to start doing it now in this report. So I was just, it's good to know if we're continuing it or increasing it or that terminology. Yeah.
That's an excellent observation, and here's why. Because part of our philosophy, and by our, I mean collectively, was that the approach for this strategic plan was that it should focus on those new items that need to be brought to life in the next 3 years, or somehow focused on in order to meet the long-term vision.
Okay.
And so really, we should not be using the word continue to anywhere within the strategic plan, because what we're trying to establish is a point of reference against how do we know if we've been successful bringing these new things into the operating environment around here. So that was really the approach. I'm glad that you noticed that as you looked at the measures and the objectives overall. Certainly, I think, we have a couple that we just talked about, like with the annual cost report, which maybe we can just fine tune it a little bit to accommodate for that.
Okay.
And I would say on, for example, number 3 on that objective D there, percent of open rate of CalSTRS connections, it's not that we haven't been sending connections, and it's not that we don't know what the open rate is. It was more the idea to focus on increasing it with the belief that increasing readership of the connection would increase retirement readiness. And that is our continued focus. I won't say continued, but it is our focus. And so there are some things that we truly do, but I know for certain that this target represents raising the bar to a level that the communication team felt was a stretch for them.
Yeah, and then that CalSTRS Connections is a publication, correct?
Correct, it's the newsletter that's sent out.
Right, okay, right. And then I just, I get it, but I don't know I didn't realize that was the title. The title of a publication.
I think you probably receive a
Yeah,
different
I get a
version.
different one though,
Yes.
I think.
Yes, there's also a retired
Yeah,
member,
I
I
have an
believe
old
it's
person
called.
on mine, so. And I have one more.
relaxed
just-
person on yours.
Yeah, that's true. I have one more thing, on TRB 67, objective B, where you have the dollar cost per member and then the target is 213, same issue that Joy has mentioned, as far as, what was it before and, is it an increase, is it a decrease?
And I can tell you right now that it is our CEM benchmark for our last calendar year. So actually 2017.
Which was?
213.
Okay.
So it does not reflect increases at this point, which may be worth discussing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Paul?
Thank you. So on TRB 64, objective D, number 2, achieve board consensus on critical ESG priorities. Can somebody put a little bit more meat on that one? I'm not quite sure what we mean by that.
Sure. So that one derived from the discussion that we had in November at the Investment Committee when the corporate governance engagement plan was presented to the Investment Committee and was adopted. And then there was some discussion regarding, there's 35 issues that staff could be working on. And Chris mentioned, he was going to provide you a list of, what are the critical ones and what are the important ones? And then nail that down to maybe like 10 things that you want to work on. So that's what this objective was referring to.
So it's specifically corporate governance engagement issues?
The ESG priorities, correct. The critical ESG priorities.
Okay, maybe we could put it that way, because ESG priorities, can encompass a whole lot more than just our corporate governance engagement efforts, as we talked about yesterday. We're broadening the view. So I just think if that's what we're referring to here, we should make that clear.
We can make that edit. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have anyone else in line. Does anyone else have some questions? Okay, I do.
Get some edits?
Well, I think some of them might be. On TRB 67, Objective C, so this is goal 4. 4C, number 1. We say percentage of direct report employers. So this is all about training, successfully complete training. But under 2A, we talk about, we want 100% of them using. So I guess my question is, what's the timeline for the training rollout? And you might be talking about that later, Andrew, I don't know. Okay, so you don't have to answer that question now, but if we want 100% using it, and we want 100% to complete the training by the same date, October 2021 is a big date for us. I'd like to know how you guys are planning on doing that. And then also going back to Sharon's comment on the whole editing, on 4C1, we talk about direct report employers, but under 2A, 3 and 4, we just said percentage of employers. And from our earlier conversation, I think it's just going to be the reporting agencies that are going to be using this. So if we could make that clear, I think trying to keep that terminology, it's hard, when the public, because this is something that the public could see, when they're looking at employers, they're looking at districts, and we're not talking about all 1,700 districts, we're talking about those 90 some odd reporting agencies, or for lack of a better term, or direct reporters is probably the best way to put it. So if we could delineate that, that would be appreciated.
Is that language, right, the direct report employers? Is that the language? Do you know what I'm saying? Because there's indirect, right? There's the 5 that direct.
So Andrew, I'll leave it up to you how that terminology is, just so it's common, because I don't think, I mean, I guess we call them direct reporters. They're employers also, but so it's, I don't know how you refer to it internally.
Yeah, I think we can definitely clarify the terminology in the document, just in terms of, the direct report sources, the 90 some odd that you referred to, as opposed to our employers that are the 1,750 districts. And we can also sort of clarify in terms of what you're talking about, because we need 100% of employers to be reporting. And then, in terms of the number of employers that are going to be able to report on the new file format as of go live, I mean, there's some nuance in there.
Right.
And so we'll work together to clarify that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Is there anything else? Karen? Oh, Paul, I'm sorry, I still had you there. I didn't mean to not turn your mic off. Go ahead, Karen.
This is just an editing thing, and I'm not sure if I'm on the right track or not, but on TRB 61, the language of each goal looks fine to me as far as parallel construction, but the what success looks like it's kind of off, and I don't know if I'm reading it incorrectly or if it can be more.
I think it's just the sentences underneath the titles or.
Yeah, let me take this. So we had the concept of the placemat, and Jan, thank you for bringing
Right.
that. That's what you saw at the October
Right,
offsite.
right.
And so what we try to do is to bring back what the board reached consensus on. If we have further editing to do to make that construction parallel, we'll certainly do it. I think what we tried to display here was the specific consensus that we came up with, so that before we are changing words, that we do not mince words. So that was the idea, but
Okay.
if that's the preference, we'll certainly make that happen.
It's my editing.
There you go.
I appreciate that.
Go, Karen. All righty, any further comments or questions? Thank you so much. And Thank you
you,
for all the
Madam Chair,
work that you've
members of the
already
board.
done and that you will continue to do on our behalf. All righty, next item. Lisa, Julie, come on up. Oh, and Giselle, come on up.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and actually let Giselle kick the item off.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, Giselle.
My name is Giselle Geiger. I'm the Facility Planning and Development Manager for CalSTRS, and I'm the business lead for the headquarters expansion project. So at the November 2018 meeting, the board approved the construction of an expansion structure at a cost not to exceed $300 million, utilizing bond financing. Additionally, staff agreed to return to the board with further detail regarding the governance structure of the expansion project, as well as the process to secure bond financing. So today, Lisa Blatnick, Chief of Administrative Services, and Julie Underwood, Chief of Financial Services, are here with me to go over these two processes. We're building from the successful framework of the Phase 1 construction. We have established milestones with predetermined controls to reduce the risks associated with a project of this scope and complexity. Using project objectives and milestones, the facility planning team gathers input from CalSTRS business areas and moves decisions to the executive steering committee. The planning team manages the day-to-day project communication, meets with our design and construction partners weekly, and brings decisions to the executive steering committee twice a month. The executive steering committee reviews major design milestones and any changes, such as security and building access, prior to the team moving on to the next phase. Once the GMP is established, they'll review and approve any decisions to expend contingency. And Ridge Capital really acts as our primary oversight to ensure that the project maintains momentum and stays within budget. Once the GMP is established, they will make recommendations to CalSTRS and oversee the transfer of all project allowances and contingency. And Lisa's going to cover today details of the reporting that they will be providing us.
Yeah, I look at Ridge Capital kind of like you look at Grant Thornton for your pension solution project. They really, although Ridge Capital doesn't report directly to the board, they're not the board consultant, they are our oversight. So they're CalSTRS advocate. They're the boots on the ground. They're really monitoring the progress of the schedule and making sure that we're staying within budget. So we count on them. That's really their full-time job, to ensure us that the decisions that have been made are actually being implemented and executed out when the construction starts. And so what they provide us every single month is a monthly report, and that report is going to be shared with the executive steering committee every single month. And we've made a recommendation that there's a subset of the board that will also get that report every single month. And just to give you an idea about the detail that's in that report, the first thing they start with is the project overview. So that really is a standard description of the project that includes the size and the features of the project. And then they go on to associated parties, and that is really a list of the major trades and partners who are involved in the project with us. They remind us of the target value design commitment. It is a reminder to the entire project team that there is a TVB, and that any negative cost impacts to the project have an equally positive offset. So basically, we're staying within that target value budget. I like that it's in this actual document every single month, because it is something that the entire project is committed to and driving towards to make sure we stay within budget. They also go over significant accomplishments. For now, these accomplishments are design phase milestones, but as soon as construction starts, they'll switch to construction milestones. There's also a section in there for contract status. Right now, that contract status is really an update to give visibility into the amendment status of Ridge Capital. As you remember, we were given permission to spend $8 million. Now in November, we were given permission to move the project forward, which means that their contract now is the full $300 million. So that's an amendment that we're working on. Design status, what has been accomplished over the past month related to finalizing the design. That's what that category means. Pre-construction activities, for this particular month, those pre-construction activities included who the key building subcontractors were that were selected over that past month. They also provide budget status, how the budget is shaping up as we move from schematic design to design development and documents to construction documents. So again, it's keeping us in line with, as we're moving to the different phases, how is the budget shaping up and what kinds of risks are there associated with the budget. The schedule status, for now, the schedule discusses plan submission for each of the design phases. The construction schedule will take shape once building permits are issued. Right now, it's really hard to give the board an idea of what the schedule will look like until we get building permits pulled. And so that really will be the kickoff of when we can start construction and how the weather is going to play into when the commencement of construction begins. So. There's also a section on public agency review status. There's two different entities that we're working with on this project. One is the City of West Sacramento, and the other is the Office of the State Fire Marshal. So those can pose risks because sometimes they have different interpretations. And if there's conflicts, that could slow the project down, or it could be a budget augmentation that we have to make because there's some different type of interpretation. Risks, the most critical risk to the project or schedule right now is really those plan check conflicts that we're worried about with the city and the fire marshal. And that could delay the start of construction. But again, that kind of work is given to Ridge Capital, Michelle Azevedo, and she's actually here. And so she's working really closely with the city, and she has a great relationship with the city, and she's acting on our behalf to make sure that those conflicts don't cause a delay in what we're trying to achieve here. And then finally, there's a risk issue decision matrix log. This really documents the decision needed from CalSTRS and the risks and issues from inception to closure. So we're just kind of continuing on. A good example of something that might be on that risk log or that decision milestone log is, for instance, childcare. We need the programming for the childcare by this date because we need to move the design plans to the city, and we need to know where the utilities are going to come in for that space. So that's an example of, okay, there's a time frame for that decision because that decision drives the plans that go and that need to be approved. So from a board oversight perspective, we are recommending that this document that I'm discussing today be provided to a subcommittee of the board, and we had recommended the board chair as well as the chair of the investment committee. That was similar to what we did the last time when we built this building, and it worked very, very well. And then we had monthly check-ins with those individuals just to make sure that they were comfortable with the progress, and we could really face-to-face have good deep conversations about any risks or issues that we see along the way. And then when the construction starts, definitely giving them an opportunity to do hard hat tours and to walk through to make sure that they feel comfortable with the progress and it's progressing as you would expect it to with the money that's been spent. So that's really what our recommendation is. Now, what we really would like to talk with you about today is how are we going to engage the rest of the board? And so that's something that I wanted to talk about today because there's different options that we can do in that case.
Then do you want to ask your question before she gets into that, or you want to wait?
Well, I can ask it now.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up. And, you know, I think overall the governance plan looks like it's very well thought out and very forward thinking. And it's nice that we have the example from 10 years ago too to work off of. So I think that our question was related to keeping the rest of the board informed on a regular basis. And to us, we see the visibility of this project and the size of the budget very similar to Pension Solution, where we have a regular standing item to update the board every time that we meet. And I don't know that, you know, we certainly don't need to do walkthroughs. We don't need to see the monthly budget, but it would be nice to have a spot on the agenda where it's reserved for just an update to the board. So
Definitely. For the first project, one of the things that, how we informed the board was it was actually part of Jack's CEO report. And then that went along for about a year or so, and then it was pulled off of that, and then we had some regular check-ins with the board. There's all kinds of ways we can do it. We could do it on we could do it every single board meeting. We could have an update similar to what you have with the pension solution project. I think that's probably a little too much for this type of project. Perhaps we could do it quarterly, or perhaps we could do it based on construction milestones. So let's just say after the foundation pour, we could give you an update on where we are in schedule and budget. And then maybe once we get the topping out, the steel constructed, we could have another check-in with you. But that is the pleasure of the board. We're happy to do whatever makes you comfortable as far as the number of times that we're providing you information. I do think that the information that's provided, what I'm recommending is that, what I would be, if I were you, I'd be wanting to know the schedule, how we are coming with the budget, and if there's any really risk or issues that are facing the project that could be problems down the road.
I'm sorry, hang on a second. Go ahead, Lynn.
Sorry. Well, I saw the floor. I think that would be good, those 3 items that you mentioned. And I think our office's preference would be to have it on a regular meeting basis. And whether it's part of the CEO report, I don't know that it's something that we discuss at length every meeting, but if there are any red flags, it's nice to have that place to bring it up.
That works well for us, absolutely. And you're gonna do drive-through every time you come to the building.
Well, yeah.
So.
Not literally through, but.
Well,
Thank you.
you have to get under the construction, but
I guess so,
I think.
guess, yeah.
Yeah, but seriously though, I think that works well, and we, though there's less exciting parts of the project and more exciting parts. The first time around, we really didn't encounter any serious issues, so it was more just progress reports. We expect the same here.